Well, today marks the biggest shake-up of alcohol taxes in a century. I announced them as Chancellor and today they're being delivered. The centrepiece of those reforms is backing British pubs. Now that we've left the EU, we can ensure that the tax you pay for beer on draft at pubs is lower, less than the tax you pay for beer at the supermarkets. But we're also radically simplifying the system so that the lower the alcohol in a drink, the less tax you pay. And that means price cuts on a range of popular drinks, whether that's fruit ciders, cocktails in a can, Baileys or sparkling wine like Prosecco. We're also growing the economy by cutting taxes for small producers so they can expand and employ more people. Taken together, taken advantage of our Brexit freedoms to back British pubs.
Aside from the simplification, though, you'll acknowledge we are also seeing a 10.1% rise in alcohol duty across the board. The Wine and Spirits Trade Association says it's the biggest single rise in alcohol duty for almost half a century. How's that consistent with lowering inflation, Prime Minister?
Well, if you look at it, over the last few years, we've typically either frozen or cut spirits and other duties, and Scotch duty, for example, at the moment is the lowest it's been in real terms for something like 100 years, and we're moving to a system which is just inherently more sensible, that the lower the strength of alcohol in a drink, the less tax that you pay. I think most people will agree with that as a common sense principle. That's what our reforms do, and as I said, there'll be a range of popular drinks that see reductions, whether that's cocktails in a can, fruit ciders which are growing in popularity, drinks like Baileys, but also sparkling wine like Prosecco. So look, I think there's something for everyone in there, but crucially this is about backing British pubs. For the first ever time, the tax you pay for beer on draft in pubs will be lower than the tax in the supermarket, because we want to back British pubs and we're taking advantage of our Brexit freedoms to do that.
You did announce yesterday 100 new oil and gas drilling licences in the North Sea. A lot of your Conservative colleagues are upset with that. Former Minister Chris Skidmore says you're on the wrong side of history. Are you, or is he the former minister who actually signed the net zero pledge?
Look, well, he also wrote a report praising the government for its leadership on climate change, and I'm grateful to him for that. But yesterday was about strengthening our energy security. You know, the independent assessments say that even when we meet net zero in 2050, around a quarter of our energy needs will still come from oil and gas. So the question is, where should we get that from? I think it's eminently more sensible to get that from here at home. Why? It's better for our energy security, because so we're not reliant on foreign dictators. Better for the economy, because it supports hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's better for public services like the NHS, because those tax revenues will help pay for it. And it's actually better for carbon emissions, because if we had to ship that energy here from halfway around the world, it would have 3 or 4 times the carbon emissions by the time it got here. So any which way you look at it, what we're doing is the right thing for the country. It's a pragmatic thing, and that's why we will continue to deliver it.
BP have just announced quarterly profits of £2 billion. How comfortable are you about those profits, given that they've watered down their climate pledges? And are you committed to a windfall tax on North Sea production until 2028?
I know people will hear about these profits from energy companies and be frustrated, but I want people to know that that's exactly why, as Chancellor, I announced a windfall tax on these wartime profits of energy companies. That tax is 75%, so it's high by any international standards. It's already raised almost £6 billion since I announced it as Chancellor, and we're using that money to help pay for people's energy bills. So around a half of a typical family's energy bill over the past few months has been paid for by the government. That support is worth £1,500. It's enormously helpful to families. I know bills are high, but we have stepped in, taxing the windfall profits of energy companies, using that money to help lower those bills. I think that's the right approach, and I think most people will agree with us.
And finally, Prime Minister, are you concerned about fears of fire safety on the Bibby Stockholm? You'll hear that the Fire Brigades Union has called the government's approach to fire safety on these migrant barges, quote, reckless.
All migrant accommodation has to go through a series of checks and inspections to make sure it complies with regulations. That's what's happening in this case. But let's take a step back. This is ultimately about fairness. I don't think it's fair that British taxpayers are forking out £6 million a day to house illegal migrants in hotels. I want to put an end to that, and that's why we're passing new laws. Our Stop the Boats bill, it's one of my 5 priorities, because I believe that if you come here illegally, you shouldn't be able to stay. We should be able to detain you and then send you back to your own country if it's safe, or a safe alternative like Rwanda. I think that is the right thing to do. It's the fair and compassionate thing to do, and that's why I'm pleased that we put these new laws in place. Laws, I might add, were vociferously opposed by the Labour Party, who voted against them, I think, 70 times.